talk. Okay, it's all you, Renee.
Thank you. Just so you all know, I pay Susan big money to talk about me that way. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those beautiful accolades. I'm so happy to be with all of you. I'm a psychologist. I'm a certified personal trainer. I have a center called the Metamorphosis Center for Psychological and Physical Change, where I integrate psychotherapy and exercise. I founded that center after I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I found that clean eating and exercise was really important to me. And I basically started that center where I really started a unique blend of visualizations that I integrate with psychotherapy and exercise. My most important role is being a mom, and I'm just really blessed to be here. So thank you for having me. I definitely want to speak about compassion fatigue. I started off my career as a psychologist working in a pediatric cancer center. And so for 6 years, I worked with children and adolescents and their families who were diagnosed with cancer. So I was certainly in the venue of special needs for a long period of time. And after 6 years, I was exposed to so much trauma that I said, enough cancer, enough trauma. And in April, I decided to leave. And in July, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I haven't had much luck getting away from cancer, but I do have quite an interest in trauma and in working with people with special needs. And I will definitely say that the children with whom I worked helped me tremendously in my own journey with cancer. So I wanted to speak to you all about compassion fatigue because you are definitely professionals who are exposed to people who are experiencing trauma. So the definition of actually, I should start my whole, here's where you're going to see how technologically savvy I am. I'm going to try and share my screen. This might, oh, look at this. Wow. Okay. And we go to share. Hold on one second.
Perfect. You're doing good.
Yeah, thank you. This is a big thing. Hold on one second. I know that you can actually do slideshow and play from start. There we go. Oh my God, I'm so impressed with myself. You can't even imagine. This is like you can't even imagine. This is a big thing. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about compassion fatigue. The definition of compassion fatigue is when it's a state of physical, emotional, and psychological overwhelm. And that's from the experience of being exposed to the emotional trauma and stress of the people that you're working with. So it's not something that you're experiencing from your own self. It's from the trauma and stress of the people that you're helping, which is different than burnout. And burnout is a cumulative state of fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and dissatisfaction with your work. So they're two different things. Compassion fatigue, the differentiation, once again, is when you're exposed to the stress and trauma of people that you're working with. In order to have compassion fatigue, you also end up having burnout. That's something that also happens along the way. The other names for compassion fatigue are empathic distress, because you literally become distressed by your level of care for other people. It's also called vicarious trauma and secondary trauma. Who is at highest risk for experiencing compassion fatigue? All of us. If you have adult elders that you're caring for, if you have your own children that you're caring for, or if you're professionals working in the helping world, we're all going to be at risk for experiencing compassion fatigue. Who is at particular risk for compassion fatigue? All of you. Why is that? Because you're working in the helping field. You're particularly at risk if you are working as a healthcare professional. We all saw that to a high degree during COVID. We saw healthcare workers who were putting their lives at risk, right? They were working long hours. Particularly at risk are women in the healthcare field, young women working long hours, and specific to healthcare, those who don't have protective equipment for themselves. We definitely saw that during COVID. Who else is at risk? Therapists. Why? Because they are exposed on a day-to-day basis to the trauma of patients. Who else? People who work in any helping profession where you're supporting people with trauma. So many of you know from your own work that you're experiencing people who are going through a high level of distress. And lastly, who is at risk? Anybody who has high empathy for people experiencing trauma, particularly if you yourself have experienced this level of trauma. So if you are somebody working in the divorce field and you yourself have experienced divorce, you're going to have a greater level of empathy for the people with whom you're working, and therefore that level of empathy puts you at a higher risk. What are some of the risk factors for compassion fatigue? As I said, most commonly experienced amongst people working in the healing or helping profession, providing care to individuals who present with difficult situations, severe issues, or those experiencing distress and trauma, providing care in difficult or dangerous environments, providing care to individuals who are physically or verbally threatening. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have worked with clients who become aggressive or volatile? Yeah. So yes, I'm sure we all have. I think divorce can be particularly polemic, right? Particularly tumultuous. And so I think that we're all going to be exposed to that. One of my most recent experiences as a therapist was I was working with a woman who called me to say that she was considering separating from her husband. Our first session, she used our very first session to tell her husband in my presence that she wanted a divorce. So I was somewhat misled because I thought that she was literally considering, separating and wanted to work on the relationship, but in fact used me as sort of a safety mechanism to tell her husband that she wanted a divorce. He became extremely volatile, was really aggressive and angry to the point where I actually felt not only was she in physical danger, but myself, I thought that I was in physical danger. Another risk factor, providing care under a heavy workload, excessive demands, long work hours. So I know many people who are trying to help other people end up putting their own needs aside, log long hours. They're really involved in their cases, and that's also a risk factor. Compassion fatigue occurs when these triggers or experiences start to affect your thoughts and moods outside of work. What do I mean by that? When I worked in the Pediatric Cancer Center, I was seeing these children all day long with different diagnoses of cancer, different blood disorders, different traumas. And it wasn't until I ended up getting a phone call from my daughter's nurse. She was in elementary school at the time. And the nurse said to me, "Your daughter has a headache. I want to send her home." And my first thought was, where's the headache? Is she alert and oriented? Is she complaining of pain anywhere else? Because my first thought was, is this a cancer diagnosis? Which was completely distorted. But I had been exposed to so much trauma that I was starting to see the world through that lens. So once again, it's normal to be affected by your work in the caring profession, but when it becomes overwhelming and you're starting to think about this all of the time, it's considered compassion fatigue. There's supposed to be a video here right now. So here's my first tech thing. Where'd the video go? It's not happening. Can I go like the Lifeline? What's that show that they, you can call an emergency lifeline? Not only is the video not showing,
Oh,
but the video is not showing, but oh, that's
can
a
you
shame.
get to the next slide?
Yeah.
Maybe you could try to come
When,
back to the
when you
video.
go to share on the
Yeah.
share thing, there's a little checkbox that says permission to, so you'd have to like unshare it and then go re-share it again.
Okay, so just a little checkbox. Check it, right?
Yeah, there should be a little checkbox on the share thing that says share audio,
Okay, share. Hold on. You're
but
going to
you'd have
walk
to
me through this.
unshare it.
You're going to
Mhm.
walk me through this. Hold on. Share. So it says options, share sound. Do I check that?
Yes.
Okay, check that. Okay, now go back to share.
Yeah, then go, right.
Okay.
And then reshare it. And then try and run the video again.
Nope.
No.
It's bringing me to Zoom. Okay, well, hopefully
Okay, try.
hopefully I
Sorry.
could just skip this video. Give me a second. For some reason, it's not allowing me to. Okay, well, it was a great video. I'm gonna have to, maybe we can get it online. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Okay. So anyway, we went through some of the who's at highest risk, right? And now we have what we talked about, some of the risk factors. Now we're going to talk about what are the signs of compassion fatigue. It affects your ability to do work and complete daily activities. When I say a mind-body connection, a mind-body connection is pretty much that the things that we think can end up impacting our body. So if we're walking around feeling sad and overwhelmed, we can actually experience physiological symptoms of that sadness in our bodies, right? If we're extremely stressed, our bodies can start to increase our level of cortisol, which is a stress response. So whatever we're thinking about can impact our bodies, and whatever we're feeling in our bodies can impact our thoughts. So if we're feeling sluggish, if we're feeling like we have a stomach ache, we can then in turn start to think more sluggish or sad or difficult thoughts because our body is experiencing those difficulties. So that's the mind-body connection. Some signs of compassion fatigue, you're going to see physically headaches, stomach aches, body pains. Many of us can maintain these body pains even in our posture, the way that we walk. We can feel, heavy shoulders, neck aches just by the amount of tension that we're experiencing physically. Other signs of compassion fatigue, they're very similar to symptoms of depression. We have something called anhedonia, which is a lack of desire to do the things that you used to want to do, lack of motivation, being detached from your friends, your family, being detached from your work, feeling irritable, cynical, starting to feel like the world is no good, nothing ever works out, mood swings. Sometimes people can experience numbness in their personal or professional life. Many people describe it as walking through the motions, or some people say it feels like the lights are dim. And in the psychology world, this can be referred to as a dysthymia, a low-level depression. Feeling like a failure in your role. I can't do anything to make this better. You can be overwhelmed with people's problems to the point where you start to become hopeless. Like no matter what you do, it's not going to help the situation. Anyone relating to any of these things that I'm talking about? Anybody ever felt this in their job? Okay. We say in therapy that sometimes we can experience the emotions of our clients in the room. So at times, as a professional working with people who are going through divorce or trauma, we can experience their hopelessness. So we can experience, it's a parallel process. We can experience our level of hopelessness because of their level of hopelessness. And in at an extreme degree, this can be linked to substance abuse and addiction. What are the stages of compassion fatigue? First, we have empathetic ability. You're desperately wanting to alleviate someone else's pain. Many people go into this field of working and helping other people because they want to alleviate someone else's pain. What then happens? We create an empathetic response where we're trying really hard to help someone and alleviate their pain. After we're doing this for a while, we can develop what's called compassion stress, anxiety, or burnout from overextending this level of compassion and care. And ultimately, we can experience compassion fatigue when the compassion stress becomes unmanageable. It leads to fatigue that must be coped with. So here's where when I'm in person, I get all decked out in my Renee cape, my Supergirl cape. It's got a big R on it. And this is why I'm really embarrassing during Halloween. Like I do these weird things. This is my Supergirl Renee cape. So what is the zealot phase? The zealot phase is when we show up in our superhero capes and we are ready to make a difference. We're ready to take on the world, right? We often enter these professions young and excited and feeling like we're going to change the world. So we have this high level of enthusiasm that we're going to be making a difference. So when I started working at the Pediatric Cancer Center, I was definitely wearing my cape. I came in, I was so excited to work with these kids. I was forming these beautiful relationships. And then I started to notice that these little children were in the hospital at the end of the day and their parents had to go home, right? And so when it was 5 o'clock and it was time to go, I was thinking about Nestor and Julia and Linda, who were sitting in the hospital bed. And I just couldn't handle that, right? And I was forming these relationships with these kids. And so I would go visit them. And then it would be dinner time and they would get this crappy food from the hospital. And so I would ask the doctor if I ordered Pizza Hut, if that would be okay, right? Could I sit and have Pizza Hut with these kids? And so that became my life, where I was doing this beautiful work and these kids became such an incredibly special part of my heart. But at the same time, I was really overextending myself. I started to feel like this was becoming my life, right? I was starting to get a little bit more tired because I was spending so much time there, and I was really surrounded by trauma. Then we get into the irritability phase, where you might begin to notice that you're making some mistakes. You can become distracted, start to notice some personality changes. You might become irritable and angry. And I could definitely speak to the experience of starting to feel undervalued, right? So here I was spending all this time with these kids. And unfortunately, in pediatric cancer, we have an 80% survival rate, which is amazing. When we had a loss, which was really quite devastating for me personally and professionally, I remember when I was working so closely with the families, it might be a Friday, and on a Monday, I might have found out that the child died on Saturday. And so I felt very undervalued when I wasn't notified immediately, and I didn't have an opportunity immediately to connect with these families that I had been working with on a daily basis for several years. And I felt like underappreciated as a psychologist because I experienced not being important enough to be notified, because there were many families who didn't even speak English. I speak Spanish, and so there were many families who were relying on me to help translate, to help make funeral arrangements. So I felt a degree of resentment that I wasn't being notified, but also in terms of like having my Supergirl cape, right? It was definitely like, these families need me. They need me to help them make these arrangements. They need me to be contacting them in this hour of need, right? Because I felt very, very entrusted to them. And I felt like I had given so much of myself that, that I was so important to them. After so many deaths and over years, right, you start to get to this withdrawal phase. You start to be tired all the time, get sick frequently, difficulty concentrating, work starts to blend. For me, what was that like? Constantly making these beautiful relationships with these children, and unfortunately, sometimes having setbacks, sometimes having losses. And it would start to blend, and it would start to be really, really challenging. And people would constantly ask me, how do you do this work? And I would talk about this board that we had in our clinic, and each morning on the board was a child's name. And you would know which child was coming into the clinic on each day. And I would say that when we had the terrible experience of losing a child, what motivated me was there was always a new name on the board, always a new kid, a new family to help. But after a while of doing this for years and years, you really start to get broken down, and you can experience this withdrawal phase where you detach yourself. You start to detach yourself from friends. You can't really relate to people sometimes anymore because you're dealing with these life and death experiences or these traumatic experiences. And so when people are talking about these superficial things in their regular lives, you can kind of detach yourself. And sometimes in worst case scenarios, people can use really maladaptive coping, sometimes substance abuse, those sort of things. Another great video coming up that we're not going to get to see because I'm technologically not advanced, which is a bummer. But I had a great video on zombies. So sorry about that. You can only imagine, for all of these zombie programs, it was a great video. I apologize about that. But the zombie phase is when you feel completely depleted, empty, numb. You're walking like a zombie on autopilot. You feel disconnected from yourself, your job, your friends, your family. And unfortunately, you feel like you have nothing left to give. And that can blur into your personal life as well, where you just feel like you have nothing left. Here's the video. Use your imagination. It was so great. Oh, not to worry, right? Why do we don't have to worry? Because there's help to deal with all of this. Okay. We have a lot of interventions and prevention for compassion fatigue. First, we want to really be aware of all of the signs. What's interesting about the signs that I discussed earlier is that sometimes we can each have our own unique signs. One of the things that I have seen in my own personal life, being a psychologist, is that when my life is way too overwhelming and busy, my personal sign, and it's happened to me about 6 times in my 20+ year career, I will walk into my waiting room and there they are, 2 people for the same appointment, right? And it's horrifying. So when I was much more of a perfectionist 20 years ago, it would be absolutely, dizzying. Now I use it as an opportunity to say, I'm human. This is what happens when you're overwhelmed. But for me personally, when I have 2 people in my waiting room, it shows me that my life is going too fast, that I'm overwhelmed. What are some other prevention? Seek treatment. Reach out to a therapist, reach out to a counselor. There are thousands of apps on social media, BetterHelp. I mean, there are thousands of them. There are thousands of ways to get support. But in terms of treatment, reaching out to your insurance company, reaching out to your network, finding a good therapist. Employee health initiatives. Employers have become really great at offering yoga, mindfulness sessions, retreats. And so that's something that's really important. And hopefully, if you are the employer yourself and you're dealing with employees that are working in a culture where there can be high burnout, high compassion fatigue, hopefully you're thinking about providing them with some of those health initiatives. Find a mentor. If you are working in a profession where you are exposed to other people's trauma, reach out to a mentor and ask them how they handle it, how they set boundaries, how do they deal with this level of trauma. I have always found peer supervision groups to be wonderful when you're working amongst other professionals who are dealing with the same kind of work, right? Figure out how you can talk to each other, how you can share the burden. Encourage pet-friendly work environments. Sounds super weird, crunchy granola, right? What are pet-friendly work environments? You all have heard of emotional support animals. When I worked in the hospital, we had dogs coming in constantly. Animals, when we pet them, it physically lowers our blood pressure. Literally, by petting an animal, your body releases a hormone called oxytocin, which is a stress reliever. Just by petting an animal, you reduce your blood pressure and the animals. So that's something that is just great to have around and even in an office. Using soothing scents in your work area. Scent is a really, really powerful emotion. We can use a scent and it can rekindle an emotional experience, positive or negative, from our past. And so if you yourself can identify those scents that make you feel calmer, that's something that you can put in your work area. General scents that are known to be calming are lavender, peppermint. Those are just jasmine. These are regular scents that most people can find soothing. But you might find your own, right? It might be apple pie. It might be some scent that's connected to a positive memory from when you're a child. Taking proactive preventative measures and self-care. I would love to hear just from around the room, what are some people's self-care that they implement? Anybody, just throw it out.
Exercise.
Say it again.
Exercise.
Exercise, 100%. I'm a gym rat, and I actually have a shirt that says exercise. I exercise because punching people is frowned upon. So I get it. 100% exercise. What else? Anybody else?
Massages.
Massages. Great. Massages and touch is actually a really important stress reliever, and touch can actually, I mean, just the hormonal effect from somebody else. Also, when you touch somebody, like the oxytocin also from touch, but touch can be really healing and connecting. Absolutely. Anybody else?
This
Then
is,
you, I guess, exercise too, but walking with friends.
Walking with friends. Absolutely. So not only exercise, but the social connection. Yeah.
I always say like I have a hot tub or taking a hot shower, like just the heat helps as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And heat, even when we're looking at people who have severe impulse control, one of the things that we know that can instantly change their emotional dysregulation is switching up the temperature. So we often recommend taking a hot shower or splashing cold water on your face. Just switching your body temperature when you're so overwhelmed can actually be really helpful. Yeah. So what do you do to take, so I'm really, really into nutrition. There is so much to learn about nutrition and our mood. Just in general, as like something that I just want to teach all of you, when we are eating, we always want to pair proteins with carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are bread, pasta, chips, Sour Patch Kids. That's pasta, bagels, right? That's carbs. Protein is yogurt, eggs, lean meats. So we always want to pair the two together, because when we just eat a plain carbohydrate, like a plain bagel, we are literally dumping sugar into our bloodstream. And when we dump sugar in our bloodstream, we get those corresponding spikes or dumps in our insulin. And so that's when we experience depression or anxiety, or in the case of children with behavioral disorders, increased hyperactivity. And so in order to avoid that, we always want to stabilize our blood glucose. And how do we do that? By always pairing proteins and carbs. So if you're going to have a bagel, don't have a bagel with butter, have a bagel with turkey. If you're going to have pancakes, don't have pancakes with syrup, have pancakes with bacon. That is across the board. I'm a personal trainer. I research food, nutrition, supplements, and exercise all the time. And so for all people to level out your mood and optimize your mental health, you always want to pair carbohydrates and proteins. Nutrition in general is also really important. When I see people who have anxiety and they walk in with their double espresso from Starbucks, I'm thinking that's not the best bet, right? We don't want to be having caffeine. We don't want to be having processed foods. And so as a rule, I always say, if it's made in a plant, don't eat it. If it's made by a plant, eat it, right? So we always want to look at nutrition, because nutrition can optimize our mental health. And we also want to minimize the processed foods. That's a big thing. We're now finding that there's a third, they call it the third brain, which is our gut. So it's really important to have a probiotic every day, because we have a relationship with the microbiome in our gut and our mental health. Exercise. So many neurotransmitters are given off in exercise. We know 100% unequivocally that exercise can help our mental health. And I know that, Tracy, you mentioned walking. Even 15 minutes of walking a day. It doesn't have to be hardcore resistance training or cardio. 15 minutes of walking a day can totally alter your mood. Good sleep. Adults are recommended to have 8 hours of sleep. If we don't, and it's very hard for most people to get, but good sleep is really important, because sleep is also correlated with our mental health. And so when we are also irritable and we didn't get a good night's sleep, we're much more, we make poor decision making, we have poor decision making, and it just affects our functioning in general. Sunlight, one of the most important things that we can do to set our circadian rhythm for a good night's sleep is have sunlight first thing in the morning. The sunlight actually helps our brain understand that we're awake, and at night, that's why we also think about melatonin. The lack of light is something that registers to our brain that it's time to shut off, which is why we want to avoid electronics for an hour before bedtime. We want to like shut all electronics and dim the lights, so our brain gets the message that it's shutting down. Social connections, really, really important. Always to reach out for support. We're experiencing a loneliness epidemic in our country. And so one of the most important things is to reach out for social connections. People are very, very connected today, but that's the nonsense of social media. People are scrolling and they have 1,000 connections, yet very few real friends. And so we really want to stay connected to the people who love us. Reach out for support. If you're feeling overwhelmed, pick up the phone. What's most interesting is that research tells us that when we're sad, we don't want to reach out to other people because we think that they'll be bothered by us. But research tells us that when we pick up the phone and reach out to somebody, they're almost always feeling our love. They're feeling supported by us because we're reaching out to them. And then we experience that connection mutually. Take a new route to work. What does that mean? When you are going to the same job every day and you're experiencing compassion fatigue, you're overwhelmed, you're feeling that burnout, just by taking a new route to work, you're changing the neural pathways in your brain. When we do the same thing every day over and over again, our brain gets stuck in this loop. And so even by switching our route to work, we're changing it up. We're showing our brain that there's a new thing that's possible, a new creation, which takes us a little bit away from our experience of cumulative fatigue. Create. One of the best things to do is to create, because you're putting out new hope into the world. Scrapbooking, baking, humor. Humor increases longevity. Who doesn't love something about Mary? Really? Seriously. That dog, when it looks the face, so funny. Touch. One of you mentioned touch before, massages, right? Gratitude. Since I'm a little girl, I was taught to say this prayer when I wake up, and it pretty much says, I'm thanking God for giving me another day, pretty much. And so I make it a practice when I wake up in the morning, every morning, I still say that prayer. And I list at least 5 things that I'm grateful for before I even step out of bed. And it's not hard to find those things, because it's literally like, I'm grateful for this snoring person next to me. I'm grateful that I have a roof over my head. I'm grateful that my body made it through the night. I'm grateful that I have a home. I'm grateful that I have a meal to go to. And then once your brain starts finding things to be grateful for, because you're getting this hormone called dopamine, which is the reward chemical, your brain starts looking for more and more things to be grateful for. So once you look at life from that lens of gratitude, your brain starts thinking about all of these things that you're grateful for. I'm grateful for my friend that just called me. I'm grateful to be working. I'm grateful for my clients, all of those things. Prayer, very, very important. And if that's something that you believe in, scratch off a lurker, something that's been hanging over your head. You guys know that 23andMe thing, right? I had a client that gifted that to me years ago, and it came in this big plastic box. And because I'm like tech phobic, I was just completely overwhelmed by it. So it sat on my steps for 6 months. I'm not even kidding you. 6 months, it was on my steps. I kept up and down passing my steps and looking at it and being like, yeah, no, I'm not touching that. Why? Because I was like, you have to download this, spit on this, mail that. It was just so overwhelming. One day I'm like, I'm going to just open it, right? I opened it. The thing literally took me 2 minutes. But when we convince ourselves that something's too overwhelming, our brain gets to that space. So cross off something that's on your list that's overwhelming. Outside hobbies, mindfulness. Mindfulness, pretty much 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, 1 thing that you taste. That, in essence, is like a mindfulness activity that you can do. Put those things in a box. When you're taking a shower, instead of stressing about the day and thinking about your work, use your 5 senses in the shower. Hear the water, lather the soap and smell it, feel the texture on your body. Listen to the sound of the water, taste the water, engage your 5 senses. And that is true mindfulness. And if you do that for 5 minutes, you're experiencing a high level of self-care. And the stress that you needed to think about all those things in your life, you can do that later. Trust me, it'll happen. But slowing down and engaging your 5 senses. And then most importantly, staying connected to what brings you meaning and joy as a helper. I think sometimes when we become very overwhelmed, we can lose sight of the things that we really love about our job. Some of the ways to minimize negativity outside of work: watch what you fill your mind with. When we say fill your mind, right? When we talk about even nutrition, we think about what we fill our bodies with. What do we fill our minds with? How much news are you watching 24/7 that's negative? How much social media are you exposing yourself to that's negative? Right? So we really want to think about what we are inputting into our bodies and our minds. Our relationships. Who in your life fills you and who in your life drains you? Very, very important, especially working in the helping profession when you're giving so much of yourself. How many of you have had the experience that after a long day, someone calls you and you're like, I can't even answer the phone? How many people? Anybody have specific friends that they say, oh, I can't deal with that person right now. They're just going to drain me. I can't. I'm too tired. Right? So in my own life, one of the boundaries that I have set with people who drain. If I love them dearly, they still could drain me, right? And so if somebody calls at the end of my day when I've had 10 patients and they say, can I talk to you for 15 minutes about my girlfriend, right? I want to be there for them, but I say, I would love to talk to you and I only have 5 minutes, right? I set the boundary that I'm going to talk to you, but the conversation's ending in 5 minutes. So that's a boundary that I set. And unplug. Really, really important to take breaks from social media, news. It's a good idea to find 1 or 2 trusted news sources and listen in the morning and at night. Even though we have a lot going on in our world, you're not going to miss anything major if you listen to the news twice. You're not going to miss anything so important if you check out of social media for a little while. Many people have that FOMO, fear of missing out, but take a break. I have, I think it's really important to look at activities that lift you when you're giving so much on a daily basis to people who are going through so much trauma and so much need, and their lives are in upheaval, right? So I have a rainy day box. My rainy day box has been I've been building it for about 20 years since I started working as a psychologist. And I just started over my years getting letters from students and from clients thanking me for things that I've done in their life. And I just started keeping those letters. And I have this beautiful box of letters that I can take out and read if I'm feeling spent, overwhelmed, burnt out, exhausted. It's very, very meaningful to me. And these letters literally date back 20 years already. So it's my rainy day box. Love letter. Sounds super goofy, but write a love letter to yourself. What you appreciate about your work, how you feel like you're showing up for people, what you think some of your strengths are, what you think you've contributed. I think it is so important for each of us to take a step back and figure out the ways that we light people up, the ways that we light ourselves up. I think that's super important. Boundaries. What are boundaries? There's a big thing in our society where it's like, say no, set your boundaries. What does that mean? Boundaries are literally like drawing a circle around us and saying, you can't come in my circle, right? We are determining a space that is just for us. And we can set boundaries with our body, our mind, and our time. And so sometimes it's a matter of saying, you can't come in my circle at all, right? You can't enter my space at all. And sometimes the boundary is you can enter my space, but only for 5 minutes, right? Or you can only come this close to me. And so, like I said, we can protect our bodies. I don't know if any women in here have ever had the experience that when they're pregnant, if they've ever been pregnant, somebody walking over to them and touching their belly, right? Unsolicited people coming over and touching your belly. That's an example of somebody maybe overstepping their boundary. I think that many people have experienced the inability to say no when invited to a social event, right? You feel like you have to, you don't want to say no, you feel it's obligatory. Saying no is a boundary. Go from being reactive to proactive. What does that mean? When somebody oversteps our boundary, we can become reactive. We can react with our bodies, our minds, our moods, our depression, our anxiety. When we are overwhelmed, we can go into this experience of what we call fight or flight. Fight or flight is literally like if somebody's standing in front of us, a big monster, we're either going to fight them or we're going to flee, run away. That's what fight or flight essentially is. And so when we're experiencing fight or flight, our bodies become extremely dysregulated. We're feeling out of control. And we can actually go into a state of fight or flight just by somebody overstepping our boundaries because they're entering into a space that we've decided is no longer safe for us. And so we can become emotionally dysregulated. So when you've pushed yourself past the point at work than you wanted to, or you're working longer than you wanted to, or you're giving more to a client than you had intended to, you can enter the state of emotional dysregulation. Company culture is also really important. If you're not your own boss and you work for a company that demands that you work long hours or doesn't give you breaks, that can also really impact your sense of compassion fatigue or burnout. We spoke earlier about finding peer support. Create rituals. I learned this a long time ago as a psychologist. When I leave my job, I have a ritual that separates my personal life from my professional life. I walk in the door. I immediately wash my hands. I won't let anybody touch me. Nobody. I walk in, I wash my hands. I immediately go change into sweatpants. I have unearthed myself of everyone else's problems, and now I'm in mommy mode. I'm home, and now I'm relaxed. But I will not do that until I have physically washed my hands and changed my clothing. If you are somebody who works from home, set a space that is for work only and a space that is yours for relaxation. Many people are working from home. They're in their casual clothes. They're on their bed typing. Try and separate your work and your personal life so that there's a definite boundary. It's also not good for sleep when you're doing work in your bed. Write down your woes. There's a tactic in psychology about writing down all the things that bother you and allowing yourself to sit with it for 5 minutes and then putting it away, right? We don't have to be thinking about things 24/7. If we write it down and then put it away, literally physically put it in a drawer. When I have clients come to me, one of the things that I do is they tell me their problems, and then I open up a drawer that I have, and then I close the drawer and I say, it's in there now. You're not carrying it, right? One of the things that I also learned as a therapist is when the client has no hope, we hold the hope for the client. You have to be careful there, because just as we hold the hope for the client, we can also hold the worries of the client. That amazing video that you did not get to see was all about how when we take in someone's problems, we physically are holding it, right? We are literally giving with our hearts, and somebody is dumping their stuff on us. And then because we're well-intentioned and kind, we take it in. And how do we take it in? We take it in our bodies. We can feel headaches, stomach aches, pain, right? And we take it in with our minds. We can feel depressed, overwhelmed, this feeling of helplessness, hopelessness, like the world is overwhelming. And then we can also feel like, I can't fix all of this. And that can undermine our sense of self, our sense of capability. Realize we cannot save the world. Take off your superhero cape. You are only one person. You cannot save the world, right? I have my students who I'm teaching to become therapists, and they say to me, I've been working with this person for 2 months and they haven't changed yet. And I say, this person is 30 years old. They've been living 365 days a year in their home for 30 years, and you've seen them 7 times for 45 minutes once a week, and you think that you're going to take it all away. You're not, right? I think sometimes there's a tendency for many people in working with severe trauma that there's like this superhero complex that we're going to come in and save the day. And I can tell you personally that when I worked at the Pediatric Cancer Center, I definitely had a hero complex. And when I wasn't notified that a child died over the weekend, and I felt like I was so important that like these families needed me, I had to take off my cape, right? I am one person, and I shouldn't feel that. I needed some distance. I needed, in order to save my own self, I couldn't be that person. And we can't be that people for our clients. Practice self-compassion. Throughout the day, I have a number. If you hung around with me, you'd think I'm a total weirdo because I do these weird things all day. I put my hands on my heart and I close my eyes and I breathe. And I do this for several minutes at a day where I'm literally just giving myself compassion. When I leave my office, whether it's my office in Long Island and I have to commute an hour and a half, or it's my office in Nyack and I commute 20 minutes, I shut my music, I shut my phone, and I drive in silence. And the entire 20 minutes or an hour and a half, I occasionally put my hands on my heart, but I'm always working on my breath. I am de-escalating. When I am sitting in a session with, particularly say, a couple who are screaming at each other, I am invested. My physical energy is with them. You can see it in my posture where I'm leaning forward. My muscles are tight. My shoulders are clenched. I'm going to need Botox soon because my brow is all furrowed, right? I'm like totally feeling it. And so I have learned to check in with my body posture when I'm sitting with people. Breathe, sit back, watch your posture, watch your shoulders, watch what you're doing with your body physically, even so that you're not taking it in. Throughout the day, breathe. Do what I call body scans. Throughout the day, take an inventory of where you're holding tension in your body. Focus on it and just let it go. When my clients leave my office, even if somebody is waiting, I will take 2 minutes to massage my head, massage my shoulders, and breathe. But the entire time I'm driving home, silence and working on my breath so that when I walk into my house, I'm clear and I don't bring that stress into my personal life. So that's self-compassion. And then also self-compassion, like you're one person and you're doing your best. And take breaks. Really, really important to take breaks from social media, take breaks when we can from our work, take breaks in general. Some of the resources available, if you are working at a corporation, the Employee Assistance Program, you can meet with a social worker or a counselor if you're feeling, really overwhelmed, this level of compassion fatigue. Like I mentioned previously, the peer support group, finding a supervisor, finding somebody who has been in the field a longer period of time, who you think is handling this well, and just asking, how do you handle this? How do you get through this? Professional counseling, how can you reach out to a therapist or a counselor and talk about what's going on for yourself? There's something online called the Compassion Fatigue Awareness Project. It lists great resources for compassion fatigue and lots of other reading resources online. So those, my friends, are my suggestions. I'm so sorry that you didn't get to see my cool videos. Hopefully when we get it up online, you can. And please go back online because I spend so much time finding these cool videos that you didn't get to see, but they're cool videos. What are some of your questions, if any?
I think that's fabulous. It's interesting to me. I mean, everything. I took pages of notes, but it was one thing that stood out because I say my gratitude at night when I'm falling asleep. Thank goodness for my health, that I have vision, that I have, you know what I'm saying? Like, because we can always find something, right? Like, there's people who can't see, I can see, right? Like, so I do that. And I never thought to do it in the morning. In the morning, it's like my alarm goes off and rush, rush, rush. And I mean, there were so many points, but for some reason that stuck with me. And I'm like, I'm going to see if it makes a difference in the morning. Although I feel like at night it calms me, but maybe in the morning to start my day. So there's just so many good tips that you said. I'm excited to try a lot of them, but I just wanted to give you one example of something I'm going to see if it makes a difference or if I should say gratitude at night and in the morning.
I think that whenever you say, I think it's just about the act of it. I don't think it matters when you say it, but I think it's so important to, to just find things that we're great, because it's true. Like, we get in this worldview that things are so overwhelming and life is so difficult, particularly with, all the divide that goes on in the world today and so many negative events. And so it's so important to just take moments to sit with yourself, to have gratitude, to reach out to people, express your gratitude to them, all of that.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts?
I thought that the idea of, because I work from home and now that it's getting darker earlier, I find that I feel like my day shrunk. And I like the idea of creating a ritual where I end my day. And I used to go for walks at night. I go for a walk in the morning, but I used to do it again at night. And when it's dark out, I don't really feel like it, but I need a new ritual. So this is good. I'll come up
Yeah.
with some.
And the ritual can be anything that you decide. It can be lighting a candle. It can be, I mean, it could literally be, it could be doing 10 push-ups. I mean, it could literally be anything. It's like, but it's something that you come back to that like, I'm done. You know, for
Yeah.
me, just the washing of the hands and the sweatpants, because to me, that's like very symbolic of like getting rid of, and unearthing myself of everything else. But it could be anything. And I also advise that when you're either working in an office or home, getting out for like a few minutes of, sunlight, just during the day, 5 minutes. It's not a big thing, but people sit at their desk and they eat at their desk and they don't get out. And it's so important to be in nature. Study after study shows us that even being in nature for 5 minutes, can change our perspective. And so that's really important. And along with what Susan was saying, about the hot baths, changing our perspective, changing our location, shifting it up a little bit, changing our body temperature, any of those things when we're feeling overwhelmed or stuck or in the same negative loop, just switching it in some capacity can change our experience. So that's really important.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other thoughts or questions, or anybody, has anybody in their own life or in their own profession felt any level of compassion fatigue? Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to when you're working with families who are going through divorce. I mean, and what I've learned, working through the NADP is that many professionals who are working in the divorce world, many of them have experienced divorce themselves. And so that makes your level of empathy for what people are going through much higher. And so that level of empathy is such a wonderful thing and a gift that you're giving to the people with whom you work. And at the same time, it's putting you at a slight disadvantage because you're so emotionally connected to their experience. When I worked at the Pediatric Cancer Center, people used to say to me, "How did you end up here?" And for a while, I was like, I have no idea how I ended up working with kids with cancer. How did that happen? And I eventually realized, like, duh. But when I was growing up, I was 5 years old and my sister was 7 years old, and she was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. And so I spent the majority of my childhood being exposed to somebody who had chronic health issues. And so I was a caregiver in many ways. And so I found myself feeling very naturally suited for being a caregiver, and that's a wonderful thing. And at the same time, it can be a deficit, right? Your level of connectedness and empathy can become empathic distress, right? And so you just need to be mindful of that. I wish that when I started at the Pediatric Cancer Center, I would have known more of these tips and would have known about this, because I would have done things differently. It's such a beautiful, yeah.
I was going to say, I feel like because now as a certified divorce coach and I own my own practice and I can set boundaries, it's easier than in my other career as an educator. When I was a teacher and administrator, I felt like my hands were tied. I wasn't my own boss. I couldn't, there were children, there were parents, there were school board members, there were so many things that were out of my control. Not to say that we need to be in control, but just I do think it's interesting, like when you worked for the hospital and you were an employee versus now you're your own practice. Same with me. I felt a lot of what you were relating to. I remember that's how I felt as an educator, not so much, even though the stresses are more with high conflict divorce in some ways, it's still, there's certain boundaries that we can do when we, as a business owner, have more control than as an employee, if that makes sense.
And it's important, the organization that you work for, because when you're mandated to do these things, go ahead. Thank you. When you're mandated to do these things, you have less control, right? I recently was speaking to employees who work for a food pantry, and they are just exposed on an everyday basis to people who have food poverty, right? They're seeing things and like they can't escape it. And when you're, tasked with working for an organization sometimes that requires long hours, that doesn't let you take breaks, that, demands certain things, it's much harder to, practice all of the empowerment strategies, and it's just something to be really mindful of. And so hopefully employers will start to be more mindful of things, that the resources that they can provide for their employees, as simple as, you know, giving them breaks, or you know, providing retreats or mindfulness, or, you know, just learning these strategies.
Absolutely. I'm going to stop the record button